Well, good morning, and thank you, Hector, and thank you, Luis, for inviting me. Thanks, everyone, for being here. As Luis was saying, very early in the morning. My name is Ignacio Martinez Moyano, and I'm with Argonne National Laboratory. And I was really pleased to be invited to these meetings, although my area of research and the area of research that you're going to be hearing from is not connected to animal science, but in the sense of the subject matter that we explore normally. But I think that part of what we do is going to be of interest to you because many of the things that we do have to do with understanding complex systems, and that is what you are interested in also, I would assume. All right, is not working. Give me 1 second. No, that is not connected to this one. It's supposed to be. Yeah, it should be the presentation. It is in presentation mode. Well, I'm gonna quit that and bring it back up. Sorry, guys. This is gonna be the clicker. Okay. Now it's supposed to work. It worked. Perfect. Thank you. So as I was saying, I'm with Argonne National Laboratory, and just a quick note on what type of things that we do, and in case you don't really know what Argonne National Laboratory is, or the or the network of labs that belong to DOE. So we're part of the Department of Energy network of national laboratories. There are 17 national laboratories in the United States. We are the first one that was established, a spin-off of the Manhattan Project. At the very beginning, it was more so connected to national security and to nuclear energy in particular. Today is way more than that. Of course, we do have an area of exploration in nuclear energy, but we are part of the Office of Science within the Department of Energy, and therefore what our main mission is science, open science, and science development. Unlike there are other labs that belong to NNSA, which is their main mission is weapons development. We are on the science side. Part of what we've been doing since then is expanding the mission from a single site of nuclear energy to multiple areas. We are located in Chicago, well outside of Chicago, and that campus was developed after the first sustained nuclear chain reaction was accomplished at the University of Chicago, and then we moved out to one of the suburbs. It's called Lemont. Of course, by today's standards, doing that kind of work at an urban area, like creating a sustained nuclear chain reaction, would be said that it is virtually impossible to do, right? But at the time, back in the 40s, it was perfectly fine to do it, and we're part of that effort, and we're still going strong. The type of work that we do touches many types of individuals. We have a budget of about $1.2 billion a year, so we are like mid-size national laboratory for national laboratory standards. We are not small, but we're not really large either. We have a number of students all the time at the lab, in the several hundreds, as you can see there, and we are about 3,800 people, out of which like 1,700 research staff like myself. We have also a number of big toys to to work with. Some of the ones that are more impressive, if you will, is our advanced photon source that we just got rebuilt to the tune of another, I think, $600 million or something like that. It's one of the big toys. It's a mile-long perimeter for accelerating photons. But you can think of it as a big, huge, very bright, the brightest out there, X-ray machine that can actually see very deep into matter and understand what is going on. This particular machine was used extensively when COVID hit to understand the nature of the molecules and to understand how to develop the vaccines for the COVID-19 at the molecular level. So that's one of the cool toys. The other cool toys that we have is, of course, our supercomputers. Our supercomputers live in our leadership computing facility. The latest one that we have is called Aurora. Our Aurora machine, of course, is the one that has been making news lately, if you're in that world, I guess. It's an exascale computer. It can produce quintillion calculations per second, which is a lot. And one of the things that we're trying to do, because this machine has been fine-tuned for artificial intelligence, is to actually use it extensively for the work that we're doing also in AI. And one of the things that I wanted to say is that, of course, these types of projects that we do are very big, and it involves tons and tons of equipment and people and collaborations across the world. But in essence, the type of things that you can do with computing and artificial intelligence, at this point in time, you can do it in your own house with your own laptop. You don't need all of these tools. Of course, if you do have them, you can tackle much more, I'm not going to say important, but at least big problems than if you do it at home. And this computer is being used for all sorts of applications, and it's still just ramping up. So we're still trying to figure out all the stuff that we can do with it. So part of what we do with it, of course, is using it for complex systems modeling. We do a lot of complex system modeling, including things that have to do with physics, but part of what I'm going to be talking about today is the types of things that we do in my research group that have to do with social and behavioral aspects of complex systems. You're going to say, well, why is a national laboratory doing this? Well, because we've understood, and actually the Department of Energy has understood for many years now, that many of the policy implications and policy usability, if you will, of some of the big programs that the government has to implement are dependent on how social and behavioral aspects are identified with and used in order to actually create the results that we want to create. Particularly, I'm going to be talking about quite a bit about our work related to COVID-19, because many of the things that we've done, as you might imagine, since 2019, 2020, have been connected to this big problem for everybody, a problem that has touched every single individual in the world for the last few years. Many of these things, once again, also apply to other contexts, and in particular, this idea of epidemics, of course, is very commonly known also in animal science, how to deal with that. One of the things that we've done at the lab is to try and understand these complex systems at different layers or at different levels of aggregation. That is one of the most important things that we've been trying to do, is to figure out what is the right level of aggregation to understand and answer the questions that we are asked. And not only the questions that we are asked, but the actual questions that should be asked in order to actually make a difference in the problem at hand, right? The approach that we have always is to model a problem. We are not here to model big systems or systems per se. We tackle a specific problem within that system so that we can actually identify and grab, if you will, levers to work with within that system to actually push it the way we want it to go. Because when you actually understand a system within the context of a specific problem in that system, you can actually try and make change of it. If you were to just focus on understanding a system without any focus on the problem, then you don't have these, the way I like to call it, is a logical, knife or logical element that would allow you to understand what to leave in the model and what to leave out of the model, which I think is the most important problem that modelers have around the world. Most of the time, it's very difficult to actually understand where to stop modeling, right? I don't know how many here are involved in actual modeling of things or systems, but for the most part, especially when you interact with others in the development of those models, you want to try and see everything that you consider important. But once you start going down that road or down that path of adding things to the model, then it's you go down a rabbit hole, right? You add one thing, and that thing brings with it more additional things and more and more and more. And the only way to stop and to say, well, that's enough, is to figure out what is the purpose of that modeling effort. And that's one of the things that we keep on hammering every single time that we start a modeling project and we try and understand a complex issue with our stakeholders. And in many occasions, actually, we've had the quote-unquote problem of having sponsors of our work or stakeholders that want to see more and more and more and more detail in their models because they are used to that, right? When you're very close to the problem or very close to the environment that you want to understand, you know all of these little details that you want to see reflected in the model. But once you do that, you get a lot of noise and the signal is very, very small. So we want to make sure that the level of aggregation that we are generating is the correct level of aggregation. And that is why we work with different modeling techniques within our group. The first one that we use all the time is system dynamics modeling, that I'm sure you are familiar with, or I hope that you're familiar with, because it's the best modeling approach ever in the world, right? Right? Or not? Well, maybe you don't know about it, but now you know, you're going to know about it. And this system dynamics modeling is a highly aggregate way of looking at the complex system. You start from a 30,000 feet view or a 30,000 kilometer, whatever is the right level, all the way up there, and then you work your way down to the details, right? But by starting all the way up there, you try to understand the big picture first. And of course, system dynamics modeling is an iterative process as it is depicted in this figure that you're looking at, that starts with trying to understand the problem and the system under study, and then you move on to being able to identify a specific problem and characterize it completely correctly, quote unquote, because the idea is that once you characterize it and you start conceptualizing the problem, then you can go back and revisit it as needed. And this is one important difference, I guess, with other modeling techniques. This is not at all linear. You have to go back and forth, and this is not a sign of inefficiency. It's a sign of understanding more and more about the details of what makes this problem important. And therefore, you can go back, and even if you've generated a lot of structure in the model, you can just discard it and rebuild again at the right level of aggregation. Actually, there is a way of looking at how you converge into the right level of aggregation by adding structure as you go, or adding elements to your model, and then discarding those that you've identified that are not good. So it's going to be some kind of an oscillatory pattern that eventually reaches an equilibrium. Once you've identified where to stop is when you start testing and doing other things related to interventions. However, this is a very important problem, how to understand where you've done adding structure, right? That's actually at the core of simplifying the model to the simplest possible set, but not more, right? Because you have to have enough things there that allow you to act as levers so that you can change things within that system. There is a lot of work being conducted recently on how to understand those problems. Well, not many, but a few dissertations out there are being written on how to understand what it's in general terms called structural complexity or structural sensitivity within these models. And also in trying to understand if you've modeled certain aspect of the problem using a certain structure, stocks, flows, other things, and then you move it and change it because there are competing theories on how that particular piece of the system behaves, then you can understand what are the implications in terms of interventions and behavior. But we do use system dynamics a lot, as you might imagine, and the other type of modeling that we do also quite a bit is called agent-based modeling that I'm sure you're also familiar with. And we have many applications of agent-based modeling. And since I got to the laboratory, which was a few years ago, and as I like to say that I'm a rookie in national laboratory terms because I only been there for 20 years. Most of my colleagues have been there 30 and 40 years at the lab, so I'm a rookie. But since I got to the lab, and I was originally trained in system dynamics modeling, which is this high-level view of the systems, I've been working with them to try and figure out how to go from the high down and then from the bottom up and meet at the right level of aggregation and using all the good things that system dynamics has to offer and also all the great things that agent-based modeling has to offer. But part of what has been an interesting journey is to try and figure out and say, well, is it really worth building as an agent-based modeling because of the type of questions that we're trying to answer? And of course, if that's your preferred way of modeling, you say yes to everything, right? But in reality, you might be overkilling it in a way because building agent-based models is way more labor-intensive and data-intensive than building system dynamics models. But we build both, and we try and understand how to connect the two of them in a hybrid way to understand more of the details. So we use those two, but in the middle there are many other things, of course. And what we say is that, well, we have a role for simulation models in our work. That role has to do, of course, with enabling enhanced understanding of the system and of the problem, creating some type of prediction of what could happen if things happen. What we conceptualize or what we think, how we think about these models is like big deductive machines, like why answering machines, right? We are not interested in what happens only, but why is it that is going on, right? That's the important questions that you should be asking. Why is happening? Not only what is happening. Of course, knowing what is important, but knowing why it allows you to actually move into interventions in a more efficient way. And many of the applications that we've developed has to do with physical systems, like we have a number of hurricane prediction models that we develop. Also, and I will be talking a lot about these epidemic models. And also we do a lot of material science and material-based and supply chain analysis of many types of things. Lately, we've been doing a lot of rare earths, critical materials type of thing. And of course, the applications to energy, including models related to energy production, energy use, energy distribution, and all of those things that are of interest to the Department of Energy. Many of these energy models are an incredibly interesting, laboratory setting, if you will, because these energy models combine all the details that are out there with all the very important social and behavioral aspects of how to control and use them, and also different time scales of use. So some of these models are developed to understand what is happening at the millisecond or second by second element within the transmission and distribution of energy. And others are included at the decades-long type of dynamics in terms of building new infrastructure, getting new lines online, etc. So when you have all of those levels of time frames included in the same model, is called that, in the literature it's called the stiff model. When you're looking at stiff models, you have to be very careful about how to model and use simulation to understand what is going on. Other applications that we've had in the past include things like understanding checkpoint dynamics at US airports. We work with them for over a decade in trying to understand how to improve that. Of course, this type of system, as you might imagine, if any of you actually came by air flight, you actually interacted with members of the Transportation Security Administration. That Transportation Security Administration is the one that we interacted with to develop this type of model. This model, actually, what you're seeing here is a very, very simplified version of the original model that we use to help them increase performance and increase understanding on how technology implementation propagates through their system. Other implementation has to do with commercial building sector. We've tried with the Department of Energy to understand how within the commercial building sector new technologies implemented, new technologies used, and what are the implications in terms of efficiency and effectiveness of use in the long run for decades going forward. As you can see, many of these things have to do with what happens if, right? And that is at the core of what we do. What happens if you change one thing or you implement another thing? Another type of example, we've looked at what happens in terms of illegality and instability at the country level. We particularly looked at Mexico and the organized crime and flows of drugs and guns, and how that influenced instability within the country, but this is applicable to many other countries, of course. It's not only, unfortunately, it's not only prevalent in Mexico. Also, we've done some work on the impact of artificial intelligence, and this very simple representation that I have here allows you to understand how the use of AI, which is in part of what got us here, right? This idea that AI is touching every single part of the productive economies around the world, actually is generated via these feedback mechanisms that actually create hype and control around artificial intelligence, and that actually can change dramatically how we look at things and also how the types of things that we can do with that. Particularly in artificial intelligence, this blog that you see there that is called AI capabilities. I always say it the other way because that's the way in which you would say it in Spanish, right? It's just reversed. Sorry. AI capabilities actually drive most of the use and most of the controls. But the controls normally are lagging, right? This is the typical implementation problem. You first develop the technology, then you figure out what is wrong with it, and then you try to rein it in via controls. And one of the things is that the most different problem, I guess, in terms of AI is not actually the development of capabilities, but the self-generation problem. That's how it's called, the self-generation. This generative AI can actually, and is getting there now, generate some code and therefore go over the controls or the rail guards that have been implemented automatically and autonomously. And that is one of the problems that we're looking into. There is a big initiative that it is a collaboration with many other labs and universities right now going on that is called the 1 trillion parameter model. We're trying to understand how to build those big, huge models and actually use them in the correct way without having them going out of control, out of whack. And at the end of that, I'm part of that project in a very small tangential way, but my interest there is data, right? then data is the key to all of these. If you are using large language models, and we're going to be hearing about that a lot later today, you know that many of these models have they are black boxes for sure. Some of them are proprietary, and that's part of the problem. Many of these should be open science, but that's a different story. But part of the problem is that you don't understand what is the data, what data was used to actually build them, parameterize them, train them. And if you don't have a real knowledge about the data that was used, then that's why you don't understand what is coming out of them. Although it makes kind of sense, it's complicated. But well, we could go on and on and on about that, but others know way more than I do about that. So what we've been doing also in terms of AI is trying to, within the system dynamics community in general, not only in our team at Argonne, but in general, is try to understand how to use artificial intelligence in system dynamics directly, and not only system dynamics, of course, but more generally in modeling. And as you can see, and here is just a few, there are a few examples of things that have been already published, particularly in the system dynamics review about this. But there are several different problems, right, associated with these. One is how to use artificial intelligence to interact with our models. So instead of interacting with people, we want them to interact with artificial intelligence agents and have them respond to us and behave in ways that we would expect, the public to behave. Another way of looking at this is how we can use artificial intelligence to actually create these models and help us actually create the feedback mechanisms or understand where the feedback mechanisms are and actually create the code for us. And there is a lot of things going on related to that, and there is a lot of work that have been already published on that, not only in the System Dynamics Review, but in other journals. One of the problems there is that we are trying to understand what's the best structure for our model, as we said before, and now we have this very powerful engine that is going to give us 10,000 more options than before, and in some cases that's way too many, and we are going to be facing the exact same problem than before, but now multiplied times 100, because now we have 10,000 ways of doing it, and we need to figure out which one is the quote-unquote better one. But we are trying to work our way through that. And of course, this year's conference in the System Dynamics Society is focused specifically on that, on how to include artificial intelligence and how to actually build things related to that. So if you have some time in August, the first week of August, and you're going to be in Boston, you're welcome to attend the conference and learn more about this. Within our work then at the lab, part of what we've been trying to do is actually enabling these fast decision-making processes, and we're trying to make an impact at the end. We're trying to work with sponsors that actually care about the modeling, and we use it by combining high-performance computing and machine learning algorithms or artificial intelligence algorithms, and trying to figure out how to connect all of these in automated ways. In this diagram that you see here, you see that the world sits underneath, right? That's the world, and then we move data and we inform computer models that then actually get transformed into either meta models or calibrated models that produce some sort of prediction about what could happen. And that prediction actually feeds back to the world, right? We are actually making choices or allowing these decision makers to work with choices that actually are going to change the world, and then we feed back into our models. So this mechanism that it's reported right there is not a new thing, right? That has been in the literature since many decades ago, but now we make it operational in real time using our resources. However, all of these models that we have there, well, they need to be tuned, and that is not necessarily a trivial problem, right? What we have is this ability, let's say, in the context of epidemics. If you look at this as a very simple SIR model, which is the most basic model within epidemics, susceptible, infected, and recovered, you have components that actually allow you to understand which one is going which way, right? how many of these guys become exposed, how many of these guys become recover, and that is based on a couple, in this particular case, is based on a couple of parameters, gamma and beta. And depending on the gamma and beta that you use, you can see that you get different shapes for the same type of behavior. These going up and down behavior, but closer or not as close as the dotted line there, which is the actual, historical tendency. And you can keep on doing all of that, going over and over and over until you get the best possible fit, right? And actually, that's the type of thing that we do. We calibrate them, we use them, and we get not only one single parameter, of course, but a distribution of parameters for beta and gamma that produces the most accurate representation of that particular case that we're looking at. It could be a particular type of disease or a particular part of the world, whatever. However, that doesn't necessarily scale for larger, more complex use cases because of the computer needs and because of the large parameter space that we need to actually explore if we want to get to very specific questions. That's at the core of this. It's not that you're doing one single or a couple of parameters. In some of these cases, we explore hundreds of parameters at the same time, and we try to understand how to deal with that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this project that we developed. It's called City COVID, in which we developed an agent-based model and a system dynamics model of the city of Chicago with everybody in it and all its places to understand how to prevent COVID-19 to expand beyond what is needed. This work was developed, of course, with us, Argonne, in collaboration with the University of Chicago, the Chicago Department of Public Health, and the Illinois Department of Public Health, and also at the time with the Illinois Governor's COVID-19 Modeling Task Force that we were a part of. So all of this goes back to when COVID-19 hit. Governor Pritzker in Illinois was very, very committed to actually having the national labs and the universities help in this process. So we built an agent-based model of Chicago in which we represented all of them. Of course, we have synthetic population, and we can talk about how the synthetic population was developed, but it's a lot, and I'm sure many of you are very knowledgeable about how to produce synthetic populations, and that's one of the problems that we've tackled since then. We are developing more and more elaborate synthetic populations for Chicago and a method to develop it for every type of individual that you think it's useful to develop these synthetic populations. And these synthetic populations are very useful to understand the very specific questions. Like in this case, at the end of this COVID-19 work, we were able to identify this progression of individuals, let's say, through the different stages of the disease, right? You start at the beginning, you are susceptible, and you move through this, maze, if you will, as you progress, if you get the disease or not. However, in this particular case, let's say if you are focused on ages 50 to 60 only, you can go and look at the details related to that particular population and actually at a very particular place if you want. And why would you want to focus on that particular age cohort? Well, it could be because of a policy implication or a particular type of difference that it makes in terms of health-related issues for this particular age cohort. Of course, as you grow older, you're more, susceptible to getting sick, and also it is more likely that you have other comorbidities come along, and therefore that actually stratifies all the implications of this specific disease when it is analyzed. And particularly, we can see very specific things about how that set of parameters influence that particular population when we're looking at it. In this case, here we're comparing what we got out of our model to the actual literature. As you can see, there's a lot of different possibilities in the literature. We actually were able to work with many of the authors of those published papers to figure out why there were differences, and there is always a difference depending on the specific population of interest. And of course, we saw that we were facing rapidly evolving policy and epidemiological questions by the task force, including things that have to do with understanding at that moment in time, and this is a little, piece of what we did between March and July of 2020, just in 2020 to try to understand what was going on in that very small 6-month period, more or less, trying to understand how to help all of these processes, right? Among other things, the Chicago Department of Public Health complemented our work because they were able to identify that, well, using cutting-edge computational approaches was useful, right? And also having model-based analysis in a timely manner allowed them to do things, which is part of our idea, right? And also many of them thought that this research was integral for the decision-making. In particular, they were very much interested in what was the problem related to hospitalization workload, right? They didn't want the hospitals to be overloaded, and therefore our work helped them deal with that. So one of the things that we did was to actually use these tools, right? Surrogate models, Bayesian optimization, and the high-performance computing workflow to actually do this almost in real time. And that was part of the problem here, right? Because combining all of these tools is non-trivial. So we had all of those, really understood, but how to put them together in a very efficient way, we didn't know at the time. But by now, we have understood that there are 3 enabling technologies that we work with. Of course, the first one is the simulation technology. You need a solid simulation technology to work with. It's not only the approach that you use, but what technology you're using, because you're going to have to put it together in a workflow to understand this in real time. Also, we have artificial intelligence and machine learning for simulations connected to understanding the models, understanding the calibration, understanding the parameters, understanding all the processes that are needed to be understood, but at scale. So we are looking at not doing it once, but looking at it, doing it hundreds, if not thousands of times. And in some of these cases, we ran millions of simulations to actually understand the intricacies of what was going on. And for that, of course, we needed to have access to high-performance computing. In our case, we had our own, and therefore an unlimited, amount of time for that particular emergency. But even today, if you are interested in using our supercomputer, it's perfectly reasonable, perfectly fine. There is a committee that judges the use of the time of the computer on a scientific basis. And if your work is accepted, is completely free for you. You don't have to pay anything to use our computer. So that's an important thing that is part of what the Department of Energy facilities provide to the community. So all of you, any of you actually that want to use it, please just put in a bid. It's just a very simple proposal process, and you can use the computer anytime you want. In order to connect these things, we developed also within our team this concept that is called eMuse. It's a mechanism, if you will, based on Swift to actually connect all these types of models and analysis algorithms into the high-performance computing workflows. So for this eMuse system actually uses the model, your model, my model, anybody's model, as a black box. So it produces a function that is able to be, just dumped into the high-performance computing environment and generates hundreds, if not millions, of replicas to highly parallelize the running of your models, and actually you can do things in seconds that would take for a small laptop days, if not weeks. But that is also available. And now the current research directions that we are going into have to do with, of course, more of the same, as you might imagine. As researchers, we end up doing more and more and more of the same many, many times. But right now, we've developed what we call a general infectious respiratory disease model framework, in which we have, and right now we're testing it with 5 different respiratory diseases, which are influenza, COVID-19, RSV, another couple. And basically what we developed this far is the idea that given this, and this is a compartment model, but a very disaggregated compartment model. So we have age stratification, place stratification, and race and ethnicity stratification. Therefore, we have a way to looking at all different aspects of a very complex society about what is happening in terms of disease progression for respiratory diseases. And we're working on actually increasing or expanding this to other types of diseases that are contagious in nature, right? This has been done in the past in a very punctual way, not in a very generalized way that we have now by others in the Systematic Society using high-performance computing environments like Ramandad and Sterman and others at MIT, in which connecting the social and behavioral aspects of how these things are developed makes a lot of sense. In particular, in this case, has to do with the idea of how people make decisions about using or not using protection, if you will, in terms of the respiratory diseases. Additional applications we're looking into has to do with colorectal cancer, HIV, hepatitis, opioid use, things like that. All of these ideas that are, propagating through a population, and that you want to do something about it. Very similar to, I'm guessing, animal science in terms of things that happen to a whole, population of animals. And the last thing that I wanted to say is that we are integrating even more deeply all of these processes for doing these basically or as close to real time as possible in this framework that we call OSPRI, in which we grab the data directly from the sources, we analyze it real time and fed it into our models, recalibrate the models, and produce new predictions as we go. And this happens instantly when something is available, and the users are notified, of course. All of these things, once again, at the end has to do with the combination of these three enabling technologies, as I said: the modeling technology, the artificial intelligence needed to actually understand the parameters and the results, and the high-performance computing environment. But we are looking also even now further into the use, particularly of the use of GPUs instead of CPUs, to actually move it back to laptops and not needing high-performance computing, but moving it back to laptops and have the ability to do it there. Eventually, there is another group at Argonne doing work on quantum computing, and their promise is that they are going to give us a quantum laptop that is going to be as efficient as today's high-performance computing resources. Let's see when that happens, right? We're going to be waiting. Not standing, but waiting. So thank you very much. Here are the members of my group, and thanks a lot.